Thank you, Sandra, and everyone who made today possible. From a very early age, Conference, my father instilled in me a firmly held veneration of pubs and all that they stand for. Like many working class people of his generation, who kept the post-war Britain that this party built ticking over, my father's world rotated around our local pub. It was the axis of his social life. My dad went there every night, drinking beer with his mates, week after week. The pub was truly indispensable to him. Our Prime Minister's father, on the other hand, most likely went to a smart, private club, looking down on the pub. But for those like my father, it had purpose. And so they looked up to their local pub. I was talking to a retired cashier just outside, who'd served in our armed forces, and he felt strongly that this great country of pubs isn't valued by this government, or given the credit it deserves. But words must convert into deeds, Conference. That's why it's vitally important for all of us here today, not just in London, but all over the United Kingdom, to take this opportunity to recognise and celebrate openly the fundamental way in which pubs have ultimately shaped not just our own families, but our communities, and our country as well. Even though it may seem a little counterintuitive to be having an abstract discussion here on the subject of pubs in a big political hall filled with journalists, rather than in an actual pub. But if I may, Conference, I would like to share with you the story of my first ever trip to the pub with my beloved dad. I'll never forget, Conference, how I felt, aged 10, on that crisp October afternoon, in front of my school's gates, as I waited on the Surrey pavement with my face buried in my second-hand Parker jacket. After almost 40 minutes standing there, my father pulled up beside me in his car, the Rover. I wish I remembered the model, but it was a classic British motor, as many of you already know. I opened the passenger seat door, and I moved the tools and the magazines from the chair to the back seats, and I sat down with my satchel on my lap. My father, who wasn't normally a stern man, ordered me to be silent because the game was on the radio. Football was so important to my dad. We stayed in the car, parked outside my school until the final whistle, and my dad punched the dashboard at full time and cried out, Yes! He was happy because he'd placed a winning bet on the match and was now up 130 quid. A considerable amount back then for a family from a working class background. Then I made a promise to my father that I've kept to this day. Instead of going home for our tea, like an ordinary Wednesday, we went to the local pub to cash in his bet with an independent bookie. And I swore I wouldn't tell Mum about our planned escapades or the money he won. At the pub, I got to meet all of his friends. Decent, working class pub goers with skilled, dignified jobs that they were proud of. My father, a committed supporter of women's rights, made sure that he'd approached every woman in the pub, introduced himself, and offered to buy them a drink from the bar. I had my first ever pint of beer as well, and I fell in love with the stuff. To this day, I always drink beer at the pub, not only in my father's honour, but also in memory of that inspiring day. Furthermore, I think it's really important to mention that smoking indoors was permitted back then because I also smoked my first ever fag. It was offered to me by one of my dad's friends who encouraged me to drink even more beer at the pub. While my father was in the lavatory, this man took me under his wing and he told me that getting Britain's high streets back to their former glory was really important to him. He lay the blame at our city's Asian community's feet, who were helping to rebuild Surrey better than it was before. When my dad came back, he took no notice of the cigarette in my mouth, or the fact that I was drinking in the pub. My father was always one who liked to tackle things head on, and he was determined to find the bookie he'd placed a bet with. Eventually finding him in one corner of the pub. We both went up to him and collected my father's winning football bet. Then the bookie, to my surprise, expressed a remarkably similar view to my dad's other friend from before. He felt that our town was being held back by recent arrivals from Pakistan, and that no one was listening to him. As much as I like hearing people's concerns, I said to him, "Come off it, mate." The influx of Asian migrants, I thought, was bringing our town forward, not taking it backwards, which is why I challenged his view. I believed very strongly even then that what brings us together is better than what divides us. At that young age, I hadn't yet learned to enjoy myself responsibly at the pub. So, instead of having 3 or 4 beers, like a sensible drinker, I kept necking the unattended pints and smoking leftover fags. Eventually, my own internal judgment said enough, this cannot go on, and so I vomited all over my parka and my satchel, and asked Dad to take me home, where I could recover stronger, better, and more comfortably. My dad, who was ordinarily a very patient man, shouted out abuse at me and said I was embarrassing him, and he told me I was limiting his popularity. One of his friends at the pub conference, I'll never forget, ripped off some of the crossword page of his paper and gave it to me to wipe my own sick off my front. Let me tell you, conference, I remember my head spinning and feeling nauseous in response to the alcohol as Dad marched me back to the family Rover parked outside. Even though my father, like many of his generation, was a committed post-war champion of domestic peace, he slapped me across my young face. Then he gave me a really important piece of advice that I think about every day as leader of this party. My father made the case to me that any principles I have don't matter, especially at the pub, because I'm never going to win anyway or change anything with my opposition.